Welcome to Mom in Mind. I'm perinatal psychologist and host Dr. Kat. There's more to the story than just postpartum depression, and this podcast aims to share it all, from personal stories and lived experience to experts who break down the ups and downs of life from getting pregnant, pregnancy, perinatal loss, and postpartum adjustment to parenthood. While this is not psychotherapy or medical advice, it is all of the stuff you ever wanted to know about mental health and new parenthood. Welcome back to Mom in Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. On this episode, I am bringing back all the way from December 19th of 2016, an episode that I did with Lauren DePaola, and she talked to us about sleep and sleep-deprived moms and what huge effects sleep deprivation has on us in those early months postpartum and just how critical it is for us to be getting the sleep that we need. One of the reasons why this conversation is so important is because we hear it all the time that, yeah, you just had a baby. Of course you're tired. But what that does, what those comments do is really discount the huge impacts that sleep loss has on us. And to be honest, it's not just postpartum moms, it's partners, it's anybody who's just had a baby or who's brought a baby home. And outside of that, really anybody who has any type of sleep loss. The more you lose, the worse you feel. That's just basic sleep math that is true for everyone. However, when you're in charge of taking care of a little human, it's so much more impactful on you because now you're also trying to keep yourself together in order to do what this little human needs. So anyhow, let's get into it and hear from Lauren and talk about sleep. Welcome back to Mom in Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. We're talking about a very important topic today, sleep. We've all heard that new moms and parents don't sleep when they have a new baby, but it's actually a pretty huge deal. Lauren DePaola is going to give us the information we need to know about how it impacts us and why we need to be taking a closer look on protecting our sleep as much as possible. Lauren is a wife, a mother of 2 boys, and a licensed clinical social worker in Florida. She owns a private mental health practice with a focus on reproductive mental health, postpartum wellness, and family counseling located in Gainesville, Florida. Lauren is the founder of the Alachua County Perinatal Mental Health Coalition, the president of Florida chapter of Postpartum Support International, and co-chair of the newly formed Florida Maternal Mental Health Collaborative. Wow, Lauren, you're doing a lot of stuff. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a lot of good things, all for a good cause.
Absolutely. So it looks like you're doing so much in so many different venues, formats out there, and it's all so important. And I do want to touch on a little bit of the work that you're doing as we go along. But first, let's start with you and what went on for you that brought you into this work.
Sure. So as you said, I'm the mom of two boys. And in one of my postpartum periods, I was finishing up clinical supervision, had never had any prior mental health history before, although another important piece of mental health involves traumas and acute childhood experiences. And so as now I'm involved in this part of mental health, recognize that I did have some of those things existing, but I experienced some postpartum depression and anxiety. And so here I was, educated person and in the medical field, in the mental health field, even more specifically, married, financially stable, all of the things, exercising those different things, have support around me, and still experience some symptoms. There was no help around, right? We hear that all the time.
Yep.
And so thankfully, being in clinical supervision, I did have at least some support related to, helping me take care of my primary responsibilities. But I reached out after looking in Florida and finding nothing, specifically nothing in North Central Florida. I reached out and found Postpartum Support International.
Yeah.
And through them also got connected to Dr. Diana Lynn Barnes, who's an expert in the field. And thankfully my symptoms were mild and through the knowledge, through changing some different lifestyle particulars for myself, was able to pretty quickly resolve that with some support through PSI. And again, just gaining some of that knowledge.
Right. That's great. I'm so glad you did find help, and I can so identify with your story. Mine is very similar, just in terms of, being a professional in the mental health field and not knowing what was going on really. And it happens to so many people.
One of the things too that I found is I also have some professional experience in child welfare field. Here in Florida. It's called Department of Children and Families. Mm-hmm. And, now this is part of the work that I do in Florida as well, is educating the child welfare system. And it's just so interesting in my own personal experience to have experienced some of the rage and frustration and anger and related to what we're going to talk about today, interruption in sleep and sleep debt. Those things combined for me resulted in some thoughts that I had never had before, that I was ashamed of. That so many folks that I had worked with before within the child welfare field, it all kind of hit me. And, I hear so many people say, you never can understand how someone would shake a baby or, say, I wish I never was a parent, until you're in it and until maybe specifically you experience some of these combinations.
Yep, absolutely. I'm so glad you're mentioning that. It really is hard to know what it's really like until you go through it. But more specifically, those rage feelings, those are hard. Those are really, really hard. So in terms of the work that you're doing now, and more specifically sleep, I want to understand more about sleep and the role that plays in all of this. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So from my own experience specifically, and then now with a chosen specialization in reproductive mental health and perinatal mental health specifically, we know that sleep changes so much, even related to folks who may be experiencing infertility. And, during pregnancy, we are uncomfortable. We have to use the restroom a lot. So sleep changes a lot. And stressors go up. Sleep tends to get disturbed. And certainly in the postpartum period, we find a lot of sleep disturbances. And so I know for myself individually that was a big factor in what I experienced. And so that really has directed where some of my focus has been. And so I've just been doing, first thing to mention is that there's not a lot of research out there on sleep. It's kind of a growing body of information over time. And so that's one.
I like sleep research specifically in the postpartum or pregnancy period.
Right. So even just sleep in general, it's really only in the past several, decades maybe grown and gained funding for more research studies to be done. And specifically with parents, the only research studies that are out there, at least that I'm aware of right now, are related to individuals who have no children, right? So it's not even specific to parents, but the majority are related to individuals who are maybe graduate students and understand that at any point in time, they can stop. they can stop the disturbances of sleep, and that they have some control over when they can return to their own controlled sleep environment. And the studies that we have specific to women during pregnancy and postpartum are very, very small. And we can kind of understand how, it wouldn't be a mom entering a sleep lab, hooked up to a bunch of, different machines to measure her sleep, that would be limited.
Okay. So there's not really much to go off in terms of research, but what about what you see?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things that I see is that there's a lack of education about the importance of sleep. We all kind of passively say sleep is important. And when you have a baby, you're not going to get much sleep. But sort of this idea that someday, one day you'll sleep again.
Right.
And we do what we're doing now. We laugh about it. But it's just so disruptive physiologically for our bodies in general. And so I think that's first is just the lack of education about sleep, related to whether, it's in a book about pregnancy and postpartum or whether it's in a prenatal course. There's just a huge lack there.
That's so true. Right. So moms are going into, and dads and parents on every level are going into this knowing on some level that they're going to have less sleep or not sleep at all. And I think that it makes it, because it's sort of common knowledge on some sense, I don't think it's taken seriously enough.
I think that one of the biggest things that I see, though, that there's potential to take it seriously. One of the things here in Florida, and I know across the U.S., is a focus for child welfare agencies on infant mortality. We have to find the connections. And one of the top causes of infant mortality is abusive head trauma or shaken baby syndrome. And when we begin to look at abusive head trauma and go backwards, we begin to look at what folks who were the perpetrators were expressing as far as their frustration, as far as lack of sleep, as far as a lapse in judgment, that it typically coincides with that time period in an infant's life where crying naturally tends to go up.
Right.
And so when we combine those things and we know the effects about sleep debt, whether it's insomnia, total sleep loss, or interrupted sleep, we can pretty clearly, I believe, see some connections there. Some of those connections would be our ability to think clearly and use, proper judgment goes down. Our reaction time goes down. And so I know, you see cases of infant death with parents rolling over on their child. And while some of that is related to improper, or just unsafe co-sleeping, and whatever your thoughts are on co-sleeping, and sometimes also involves substance abuse, we also see correlations between how sleep is being interrupted and reaction times and all those physiological effects of sleep deprivation.
How do you mean how sleep is being interrupted? Like the frequency or? Right.
So just a quick kind of education on sleep. I don't know if that would be helpful.
That'd be great. Yes.
Okay. So adults typically have two major parts, if you will, of our sleep cycle. That includes 5 stages, and it varies greatly from infant sleep cycles. So that's important for us to understand. So the two major parts are either non-rapid eye movement or rapid eye movement. And the non-rapid eye movement is where we begin. And it has 4 stages. So we enter sleep kind of drowsy, but aware of our general surroundings in stage 1, and then on to a light stage of sleep where we can still be easily woken up, but our body and our eye movements stop, our heart rate slows down, our blood pressure goes down, and we're basically kind of paralyzed a little bit physically. And it's for, it's for a reason later on during the rapid eye movement and that stage where you feel like you may be falling, but you can't stop yourself. All kind of connected. And then the 3rd and 4th stage of this non-rapid eye movement are where we begin to enter deep sleep. And they have huge importance because this is where we get the most restoration for brain and body. It's also important to note that a restorative stretch of sleep, so the stretch word is really important. A restorative stretch of sleep for brain and body is 5 hours.
Whoa.
So when I say that in clinic, in session with my clients, I get daggers thrown at me from the house, right?
Right.
Stretch.
Yeah, right.
Right. But it has huge effects on our whole physiological system. And then stage 4 is the deepest sleep, and it lasts about 30 minutes for adults. And then we typically go back to stage 3 and then stage 2 where sleep gets lighter. And then we move back on, through the stages, and then to rapid eye movement stage. And this is where our body is paralyzed, but those involuntary systems are working. So our heart, our eye movement, all of that. And this is where dreams take place, obviously. So the REM stage is really important as well because memories, brain restoration happens. Newer research out of University of Rochester Medical Center, Dr. Niedergard, did a research study in 2013. And again, this was finally funded by the NIH. And what they found in using mice or rats, I'm not quite sure which one, but was that the brain has a mechanism by which it cleans itself. And so it's flushing toxins built up from the day during an optimal sleep cycle, which takes about 90 minutes to complete.
Okay.
So when we see interruptions in that full sleep cycle, we're also affecting the longevity of our brain functioning, right? And so they call this system the glymphatic system. And so it's flushing the brain. And so they did this research specifically related to studying Alzheimer's and how the brain builds up toxins and then deteriorates. So then we start to think about how sleep is so interrupted.
Yeah.
During the parenting years, right? During the reproductive years. And what are we doing to our brains? So we hear so often this term baby brain, right?
Yeah.
We use it flippantly, but there's really something going on there. We're affecting our brain's ability to create memory, to flush itself of the toxins that take place during the day. We're affecting our judgment, perception, all of that by these interruptions in sleep. And then when this happens over a long period of time, we call that sleep debt.
Right. Which, I mean, from just passing article titles I've seen, we're all functioning with some kind of sleep debt on some level, but moms and families with newborns, baby, dad are heavily in this debt.
Right.
And essentially what you're saying is that your brain cannot function how it would normally function if you're not getting the sleep that you need in order to have that restorative time.
Right. And so we warn people, like truck drivers or even just maybe in driver's ed class, don't drive while you're drowsy or while you're sleepy because it causes accidents. But yet we're not educating parents on the hazards that these sleep debts can cause.
Okay. So in terms of the day-to-day impact, like what are some things that a mom would be experiencing or a dad would be experiencing or a parent or whoever's taking care of a young child, an infant, and who's losing sleep? What are the things that they would notice in the day if we can kind of recap that a little bit?
Sure. So some of the harmful effects of this that certainly we can say caregivers of young infants whose sleep cycles vary so greatly from adult sleep cycles experience. So we see suppressed immune system and ability for the body to heal. Therefore, women recovering from the huge biological task it is to recover from birth, whether it's a vaginal delivery or cesarean delivery, and the healing factor of that, susceptibility to illnesses, hallucinations. I know it was true for myself, especially in those first days. I had a cesarean. I've had 2 cesareans. And so in particular, the time period when I had postpartum depression and anxiety, in those days in the hospital, I remember hallucinating at things that I clearly were not there. So visual hallucinations. I thought that an interesting fact is that my sister-in-law had a baby the same day that I did in the same hospital.
Wow.
And about 5 hours earlier than I did. And so I remember at one point in the night, new mom trying to breastfeed, the frequency with which you're trying to breastfeed a newborn, lack of sleep, okay? And I thought at one point on the second day in the hospital that they had brought me my niece. And I was adamant that, no, I think you need to go check. I think you brought me the wrong baby. And so, hallucinations there and kind of all of those things. Mood changes, right? So we're talking about perinatal mood disorder. Mm-hmm. And so we see a susceptibility to depression and other mood changes with lack of sleep. On the medical emergency end of the spectrum of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, we see postpartum psychosis. Mm-hmm. And so we see the extreme side that interrupted sleep and insomnia can have related to our brain and body.
So the impact is huge. And we talk about sleep so casually, as we were saying before, oh, I'm never going to sleep again. Oh, coffee this and coffee that, which, okay, coffee is great and amazing, but it doesn't replace the absolutely necessary function that your brain serves and the need that we have to sleep, to have that downtime and let our brains heal and regenerate and all of that stuff. So if you had a mom in front of you who was like, really needed to get sleep, but was having a hard time doing it, what would you tell her? How would you support her and her family to help protect her sleep?
Right. So it's a really delicate conversation to have with the new parents, I think, is the first thing. And how I begin to handle that is to understand her expectation of herself and dad or partner's expectation of themselves related to what it means to be a good mom or dad and partner, and then move forward from there. And you have to take into consideration mom's efforts to breastfeed, and then certainly any symptoms that are present. The family's priorities related to co-sleeping or not, and then baby's needs as well. Mm-hmm. So all of those things taken into consideration, specifically when I have a mom who's experiencing some symptoms that when we look at cost-benefit analysis, right, of continuing in the same manner of sleep, we have to decide where the risk is greater. Mm-hmm. And that gets really sticky with breastfeeding moms because we hear messaging now in our culture, which is good and positive, that, breast milk is the ideal first food, except when we have a mom who is not doing well at all, who is not functioning, and whose symptoms of anxiety, panic, OCD, mm-hmm. psychosis, depression, whatever, mm-hmm. are way out of control, and her risk related to not caring for herself, not caring for her child, worst case scenario, harming herself or her child. We have to have a real honest conversation about that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're bringing that up. That is a real hard situation to deal with as a parent, especially if you're already feeling anxious or depressed and feeling all that pressure to do what you think you're supposed to do or what you need to do for your child, and to fit yourself in there is really difficult.
Yeah, and so I prefer to have spouse or partner come in for at least one appointment if I have a mom who's coming to me as an individual, so that we can really talk and map out what support looks like for her and how she best receives support.
Yeah.
And so one of those things may be, talking, if there's not a lot of existing knowledge for her related to breastfeeding, maybe pumping, if it's, at a time when she feels comfortable enough to pump and to have someone else do a feeding for the baby, maybe even considering, supplementing with some formula if it's not at a point where she's able to pump. But we really have to weigh the risks and the benefits of continued sleep loss mm-hmm. and engaging those supports.
Right. It sounds like on some level doing a really kind of thorough evaluation or whatnot, or kind of talking about what the sleep pattern is and what the nighttime pattern is, so you can then have those discussions about where to negotiate for something different.
Right. And I think the bigger issue here is our cultural understanding in the United States of the expectations on not just moms, but of dads and partners as well.
Yeah.
New human being enters the family system.
Yeah.
And so our culture does not value slowing down mm-hmm. and really taking time to physically recover and emotionally adjust to all of the things that come with a new baby entering the picture. And sleep has to be a factor in that.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is one of those soapbox issues for me as as is true for a lot of the stuff that happens for new parents in this period of time, there's just not enough respect given to this period of time. And I'm really glad that you're touching on that. This is a huge change, and to expect people to be able to navigate it and also know everything at the same time is just too much.
Right. Well, and also, one of the biggest things that we see, so here in Florida, we have Healthy Start, programs like Healthy Start, Healthy Families who do education with families. Mm-hmm. And so if say OBGYN or pediatrician is making a referral for one of those entities to come into the home and to talk about child development, with this sleep debt and how that affects each individual differently, our ability to learn and retain information is also affected. And so a lot of that is sort of, in some cases, wasted, time and I would say resources. Right. I also encourage families, if they come to me during the prenatal period, the antenatal period, that if they're going to have a baby shower, a better investment may be hiring a postpartum doula, or if there's an infant care specialist, sometimes called a baby nurse, for that postpartum period to help support getting some sleep, whether it's during the day, during the evening, as opposed to some of these other non-essential items that we tend to be drawn to. Yeah. Through such good marketing. Yeah. And put on our baby registry list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a fantastic idea, really, to, have people who are going to give gifts help invest in some support for sleep, if it's not already part of the family structure or the postpartum plan, if other folks aren't going to be able to come in. That's super important. So, in terms of moms, dads, partners, family members, who are caregivers being tired during this time, I'm sure you hear from people things that they've heard from other people that just are not supportive. So if you can for just a minute, kind of go through it. If a family member is listening to someone who's just had a baby and is sleep deprived or is potentially sleep deprived, what should they avoid saying? What would be helpful to say?
So ironically, one of the biggest things to avoid saying, because it's so cliche, is simply just if someone's saying sleep when the baby sleeps. Mm-hmm. Instead, a better way to approach that would be to say, I am available on, whatever day. I can make myself available for this amount of time. I would like to make myself available to you to come over and take care of the laundry, the duties of the household, hold the baby, give the baby a bottle, and allow for you to rest.
Yes.
Or be with you through the night. Because sometimes it's so lonely at night too. And it's not just that we're sleep deprived, but it just feels so lonely and isolating.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So I hear people say that still quite a bit, sleep when the baby sleeps. And if you're not anxious, that might be possible.
Right.
But a lot of anxious moms cannot do that.
Right. And one of the effects of sleep deprivation, sleep debt is impairs our judgment. And especially when it comes to sleep, we begin to think that maybe we don't need that much sleep. I hear so many mm-hmm. couples that I work with, just kind of say it's a positive thing that I can get by on 4 broken up hours of sleep a night. But then when we get into other portions of the conversation, clearly, while you may have your eyeballs open, the rest of your body is not functioning very well.
Right. So this is so important. I'm really glad that we're having this discussion, and it feels like there's so much more we can talk about in terms of sleep and the importance of it. But really, it sounds like there's a couple of important take-home messages and that you've gone over, and that sleep is paramount. It is absolutely necessary and essential, and maybe the most important thing one of the most important things to attend to for all of those reasons you listed. And what are some of the other main things that you want to make sure people understand about sleep and the perinatal period?
Sure. So I would start with just saying that not simply in passing saying that we're not going to get any sleep for X number of years, but also understanding the effects that it can have on individual functioning, and then also on the functioning in the relationship, interpersonal functioning, and the expectations that we have on ourselves when we have infants and raising young children. And I talk with my clients about laying down the Superwoman or the Superman cape for a season of time and accepting help. I think that's one of the basic parts of self-care is really being okay with saying yes when it's an appropriate time to say yes. Yeah. And also saying no, right? So in those early days, weeks, even months maybe, it may be appropriate to not have a huge party of people all at once or all through the day in the hospital or at your home and feel like you're having to host others. Mm-hmm. But instead, that it's really a special and important time for you and your spouse or partner and this new little human being to adjust to life together and to heal and to restore your bodies.
Yeah, that's great. Right. So let's get that message out. I think, far too many people, it's sort of become, and I don't mean to minimize it, but it's sort of become this like weird badge of honor to be able to, like you were saying, function with very little sleep, but it's potentially detrimental to not have the sleep. And really, I mean, on some level, it's hard for people who are in that position, who are, like you were saying, already sleep deprived, to be making good decisions about their sleep. It can be a really hard cycle to get out of. So I think, informing people about this, that, hey, this is an issue. And if there are any healthcare providers who are listening today, or moms who are listening today, or family members, caregivers, whoever, to really understand how important this is and to be checking in with each other about this, to protect their own health and wellness and that of their new family and all of those things, all of the things you've described that, can potentially be really, really disruptive and harmful for the family.
Absolutely.
So in terms of what you've seen, though, in people getting the sleep that they need or renegotiating their sleep, how quickly have you seen that it helps people to feel better?
I would say pretty quickly, rather quickly, right? When we kind of negotiate what our pre-existing expectations are and look at the risks of continued, whatever the cycle has been, and negotiate differently to get a little bit more rest and sleep and try and work closer to that 5-hour stretch more often than not. Mm-hmm. I would say that if I have a client who really buys into that and, puts into place the supports that she or he needs, I would say when I see them the following week or the week after, that they're recognizing decrease in irritability, decrease in other maybe depressive symptoms, anxiety symptoms, an increase in kind of interpersonal functioning, feeling better about their functioning at work or, just in general with remembering things or doing tasks or what have you.
That's
I think
great.
One of the hardest populations to negotiate that with or to encourage some flexibility or just a different way of doing things is with co-sleeping families. And again, that's yet another delicate conversation to have because it just is based upon individual ideas and philosophies. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it can get you more sleep. But what I would say is that I see a chronic, like years upon years of this sleep debt more often than not with families who have decided that co-sleeping is best for them. And specifically with breastfeeding co-sleeping families that at some point just don't renegotiate how often their child is maybe nursing throughout the night or, the disruptions as children get bigger and older in the bed. Mm-hmm. And so again, that's yet another delicate conversation to have.
Yeah.
But that has to be weighed against marital discord, mental health symptoms that are present, all of those things.
Right. So all of this is, as you've been saying, a delicate conversation to have. And really, I mean, I think our goal is to make sure that we help people find a balance that makes sense for them,
Right.
honoring what they want in their life,
Right.
how they want to do things, and also to help balance that out with their health and wellness, and give information and provide, this information on sleep is important. We all do it. We all need it, but we don't really understand its role and how much it can impact us until we don't have it.
Absolutely.
And so I really appreciate this conversation. I think it's so useful and so helpful. And I also want to just take a minute and direct people to you and your work in Florida. You're at Postpartum Wellness and Family Counseling.com, and you have a Facebook page. What is that? What is your Facebook page? It's PWANDFC.
Yes.
Yeah. On Facebook, and a coalition website, ppwandfc.wixsite.com/ACPMHC. So I'm going to put all of this information also up in the show notes, and for everybody to be able to access your local support in Florida and information on the work that you're doing out there, which is so cool.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad that we talked about this today. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening in to this episode re-release. This topic is so important. If you know somebody who's just had a baby, then please send this to them, because they need to understand why they feel the way they feel when they have this sleep loss, and the reasons why it's so important to try and prioritize sleep and bring family, friends, whoever in to help them to get the support to get the sleep that they need. And definitely come follow along on Instagram at Mom and Mind, and go check out the YouTube channel and share these episodes far and wide. Thank you so much for being here. Until next time. Please find the Mom and Mind podcast on momandmind.com or wellmindperinatal.com, where you can also find access to my free online mini course that is specifically designed for people experiencing anxiety in the postpartum period. Or you can learn more about the 3.5-hour self-paced course that I created just for managing postpartum stress. You can also connect with us on social media at Mom and Mind on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you for tuning in and learning more about perinatal mental health.